Hey, welcome back. I'm just going to very quickly introduce Shane, who will then take over. Many of you already know Shane. She's a visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. She works on international communication, technology, cybersecurity, privacy, internet governance, data protection. We'll start actually a list of things you don't work on.
I work on all those things, Scott.
And just as a quick personal note, Shane puts a lot of effort into connecting people in all different parts of the tech policy world, and her help is really invaluable to me. I really appreciate it.
Scott, thank you.
But now I'll hand it over for the actual
Absolutely.
panel.
And two things while I have your attention. One is one person who isn't here, but if you've seen the computer that's out in the area, Nathaniel is the one who has been working with Sarah on creating these amazing broadband maps that you can put any certain values into. So walk by there. Nathaniel's actually live. I keep going by and waving at him. So if you haven't done that, you have that opportunity. And then I just want to introduce Karina over here, who's the artist who's been doing the Converse sketches, as she calls them. I noticed yesterday with the conversation with Brian Sullivan and Charlie Ergen, there were moments where she was kind of pausing, like, I don't know what that acronym means. So she's done a great job of, grabbing these conversations, which to all of us seem very native, and to her sometimes are, it's interesting to see what she pulls out of them. So definitely take a look at those. So Noopur, this is so exciting. I didn't know Noopur until they asked me to do this interview, and they set up a pre-conversation, and the two of us got on right away, and we just immediately hit it off. I feel like I have a new best friend. And by the time some of the people from Comcast got on, they couldn't even get in the middle of it. We were like, we were on it. But just a quick intro. So Noopur Davis is the Executive Vice President and Chief Product and Information Officer at Comcast Cable. And I was telling her earlier, I think it's so important that both product and information are in her title, because that is the connection that a lot of people forget. Like, we're talking about data privacy and the importance of keeping the data secure, but part of what you have to do that on is a product. And when I was talking to her after that, I went downstairs and I grabbed my remote, because it reminded me of all the other things that Comcast has to do, and we're going to talk about this, because there's some amazing technology. Next time you pick up your remote, you're going to respect it. So some of the things that Noopur has under her umbrella is all products and services for the residential and business customers. So we know you have a pretty big footprint, so that's quite a few people. Product security, privacy of information, infrastructure security, data protection, security of the architecture. I mean, pretty much everything that runs, I feel like she's got her pulse on it. Intelligence and analytics, identity management, and technical fraud. And as you hear you talk, you're going to notice that she has a little bit of a southern lilt, because she did go to the University of Alabama and got a master's from Auburn, which I actually visited for the first time this year. So thank you for having this discussion with me. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much.
So just give us a little background. You joined Comcast in 2016. So have you been in this technical scape and your whole career? Did this kind of build to this? To give us a little background.
Yeah. First of all, I thank you. And we did hit it off. And
I have a new friend.
I was so intimidated when I first read your bio. I was like, oh my gosh, this lady has done so much. So I'm going to ask you how you got to where you were in a second. But I started as a software developer and, spent 10 years or so. I think the funnest part of my career was just writing code and building products. And then I kind of, it's a very long story, and someday we'll talk about it over beer or something. But I somehow ended up at Carnegie Mellon at the Software Engineering Institute in the early 2000s.
I like the way you say that, like you wandered past the building and somebody pulled you in. Hey, come here.
Come here, right. And so what was happening at Carnegie Mellon at the Software Engineering Institute in those days was really the cybersecurity profession was kind of being born. So things like Carnegie Mellon had one of the first CERTs, the Computer Emergency Response Teams in the world. And that later transferred and became the US CERT, but that was its beginnings. The whole insider threat discipline, cyber education for workforces, vulnerability classification, cyber risk quantification, right? All of those kind of foundational elements of our profession were taking place there. And because I could code, I ended up working in the how do you do secure software development part of that. And this was after 9/11, and DHS had just formed, and Secretary Ridge was in place, and he had started some cyber workforces. And so I was part of those teams. And it was really not planned. I kind of ended up in how do you build secure products. And we did some of our earliest pilots at Microsoft, got really good results. We ended up standing up the DHS Build Security In program. You'll still find traces of it, on the if you Google the program. And that's how I ended up in cybersecurity. And here I am, 15 years later, leading just an amazing team at a company that is really supportive, really believes in the mission of a cybersecurity function. And just a couple of plugs for my team. So my team they get personally offended if a cyber incident happens that gets past them, and I love that because they take it personally, like how dare this happen. The other thing, as I talk today, I'm going to talk a lot about what my team does, but as a cyber professional, that it's a journey, right? We are always just looking to improve. We are nowhere where we want to be. And even when you get to where you think you want to be, there's more ahead. So as a cyber professional, you're always like one bad incident away from something bad happening. So I'm going to talk about a lot of things that we do, but we're very humble about knowing that we're trying our best, but we still have we're always a few bad luck things away from something bad happening.
Yeah, the one thing that has always impressed me, I've done a lot of work in the policy side on just the whole network stack, and I'm very concerned about some of the things that the House Judiciary Committee is doing, because one of the things that I think that you're talking about that your team does is they continue to build resilience into the network capabilities. And I hesitate to use a utility reference here because I know that's a sensitive topic, but the people that use ISPs are and it's always the controversy, is it one internet or is it internets, with small I, little I, but is that it is a bit of a pool, and the networks touch each other, and there you and your team keep a self-healing element to it where you catch and mitigate, and you're saying they take it personally. It's almost like they want to go pound that little
Yes.
malware thing when it comes through, and the resilience is so important. So as somebody who comes to this from the policy side, but has learned a lot about the technology, I have such regard for the compassion that you do see the engineers bring to this, because they do take it personally. It's like their child. They built it and they watched it grow, and they are constantly trying to create a better path to make sure it's safe. It's on the road to safety. So I always try to remind the people in policy that you want to solve for whatever the issue is. Don't solve by trying to tell the technology exactly what to do, because that makes it brittle, and it isn't resilient at that point.
And it does, because one of the, in cyber more than just about anywhere else, the threat landscape is literally changing every, multiple times a day. Again, going back to those days at Carnegie Mellon, we started plotting the number of new vulnerabilities discovered per year, right? And I still remember this graph, y-axis, x-axis. And our y-axis ended at 5,000. And we thought we would never get
Was that incidents? What was 5,000?
Vulnerabilities, sorry,
okay.
New vulnerabilities discovered in the National Vulnerability Database, right? And so, we at that point, a bad year was like 900 new. This year already, we're over 10,000 new, right? So if you just look at that per day, it's several new vulnerabilities. And by the way, a vulnerability can be exploited millions of different ways, right? So it's not just 10,000 bad things, it's 10,000 times million, right? So any point in time directive about do this way really doesn't address the important part of how do you do cyber well. So what we always talk about is how do we build a culture and a process that we can count on to be flexible, so that whatever is thrown at us, we can quickly respond to it. So that's what I'm always focused on. How do I build a capability that can respond to changes and not worry about, a particular change that may be coming in?
So you mentioned U.S. CERT, and I'm sure several people in the room know who it is, but for those who don't, can you just give the baseline of the importance of U.S. CERT and how it has moved over to DHS?
Yes, totally. So U.S. CERT is the central U.S. Organization that captures all of the incidents that are happening around the world. And they put out advisories, here's a new incident, here's the threat actor, here's what you need to do about it, right? So it's really the United States Incident Response Team for cyber. So we all have our own, we have our own incident response team. It's 24/7, geo-distributed, follow the sun model. But one of our feeds and one of our very important connections with the DHS is through the U.S. CERT. So we get a lot of information from the U.S. CERT. And by the way, countries around the world have their own CERTs, right? So there's the Australian CERT, and I remember the Qatar CERT. When I was at Carnegie Mellon, we were helping them set QCERT up, right? So it was it's all over the world that each country has their own response team.
How quickly do they know when something's going on?
Pretty dang quickly, because what usually happens is some researcher or cyber professional will see something happening in, let's say, Japan. And by the time the U.S. folks even wake up, that has been, it kind of moves and it follows the time zones, right? And each time zone will start adding more information. And so by the time, you wake up in the morning in a particular time zone.
A pretty heavy report in front of you.
You're like, oh, wow, yeah. This started here, and look how much more enrichment we've got about that piece of information that might be happening.
So I'm going to dial down on the information sharing part of that, because that's been a really big challenge. And President Biden did an executive order about a month ago, just clearing
May
up.
12th, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the language that seemed like we should have fixed a long time ago. There was just these kind of hurdles to sharing both cross industry and then amongst each other. And I did a blog on it a couple of years ago. This was pre-COVID, about how it needed to be more like the CDC, that you wanted to pick up on something as quickly as possible and mitigate it as quickly as possible. And there's always been this legal challenge within the general counsel's offices of it was a bit of a one-way. It was asymmetrical. Like, you were going to share all this information with now CISA, but you also, they felt, brought risk to the table then, because they may find something else. Somebody else might take a look at that report that was an auditor that wasn't the point of the information sharing. So I hope we have gotten to a better place, because that seems to be the flow that has been missing, that it can make this go by, let's say, nanoseconds over minutes over hours. I mean, it's been hours where it should have been half an hour to minutes, it seems, for years. Yeah,
no, it's a really good point. Every time the cybersecurity professionals get together, right, that's the topic, is like, how do we share what we know? The centralized sharing systems are okay, but they're not quite sufficient. They're kind of table stakes, but we need to do more. I'll give you an example. We'll get intel like, this IP address is bad. So you go, okay, now what? So it's sometimes it's not operationalizable. I don't know if that's a word.
It is now.
So it is now, right? We just invented one. So what I would love is some way for that information to be more, our ability to take it, contextualize it, and then operationalize it, and have more of that included in that whole ecosystem. But that's not easy to do, and I think that's why it's not happened yet. And as you said, there are all kinds of issues you have to worry about. Is if I share that information, will I be held, accountable for things that? Because again, if I share one bit of information with somebody else, without providing the full context, that look, this is something that's happening on our network, which is bad, but we have A, B, C, and D mitigations around it. So don't just pick on the part that it's bad, but also pick up on all the mitigations that we have around. So that whole picture is what is so important, and it's hard to communicate that in.
So let's talk about the layers of security that you have in the Comcast system, because one of the things when I hear you talk about that, I realize is it's not your team that's bringing the problem in. It's probably one of your end users, and that it could be a residential user, it could be a business user. And so what do you do? Like, do you contact them, or do you just sort of try to quell that traffic going on your network? What is your first stop on that process of trying to resolve that?
Yeah, so people sometimes may not realize how enormous the scale is of what we do. So I'll just give you some examples. We have 100 million devices in our customers' homes, and that number keeps increasing as we start putting more IoT devices in, and So the security of those devices is super important, because if you think about a modem or a gateway in a customer's home, that's where their digital lives are being conducted mostly, right? Unless they're on a cellular network, but if they're on the Wi-Fi or using broadband. So we have teams dedicated to just making sure that those devices are secure. What does that mean? It means that we look at every line of code that goes in there. We automatically patch them. If a new vulnerability comes in, the devices get patched. We make sure that they can be booted securely. So we make sure that somebody can't inject their own software into the system. We encrypt, we manage keys, the amount of work that goes into securing a device is pretty substantial. Again, like I said, we have, a pretty large team, and that is all they do. They live and breathe. So that's one way that we protect our customers, right? The devices that they use to conduct their digital life are journey. We're still working on it, so that team has a backlog of work to do. But each day we get better. Each day we get better at the protection.
I always feel for you guys that you have the challenge of you want to say yes, bring anything onto our network that hopefully you know what that is. You do know what it is, right? I full disclosure, I'm a Comcast customer, and so I know enough when my system's not working. I can call and try to get to somebody, and it's always fascinating. They'll go like, okay, what is it you have? And they'll like give me the IP number. I'm like, oh, is that the thing that's the problem?
Yeah.
Because you've attached all these things to your network, and then I just you make the magic happen.
Totally.
And so and then I think about like your business customers. And I realize there's a line of business for Comcast where you can go in and like basically secure. It's kind of like when you do the platinum, you're like, okay, just tell me what's wrong and unplug it and make my system go. All I want is the internet. It's so important. Yes. But you also have to have the ability to let anybody put stuff on there, the whole
Absolutely.
IoT element.
Absolutely. We are not in the business of getting in the way of our customers doing whatever they need to, right? On that is their business. In fact, it's a stated principle. What you do on the internet is your business, right? That is one of our stated principles. We don't get in the way of that at all, and we shouldn't. But we do have two things that we provide. One is we call it our advanced XY advanced security product. And if you're a Comcast customer, you get this by default. And
you can also play with it on the app. It's really fun.
It is actually fun. It's actually scary because it reports every day how many threats it blocked and how many things. So it basically protects any device that is connected to your Wi-Fi, your home Wi-Fi, right? And it does it automatically. You don't even notice. We did a fascinating study last year where we had empirical data because we can see how many threats we're blocking. And we also conducted a survey of our customers, sample. And then we compared the results of the empirical data we have and what customers think. And the gap was really fascinating. So we asked our customers, how many times a month do you think you're attacked? And the answer was maybe a dozen, right? That was the average answer from the survey. And then we looked at our empirical data, like how many threats were we blocking? And we were blocking almost an order of magnitude more, right? So like 104 a month. So that gap is just fascinating. People know that they are under attack, but they don't realize how broad that attack is. One of our metrics used to be, when I was at Intel, for example, was how long does it take from the second you boot up a new machine and connect it to the internet to the first attack, right? We call that like the mean time of comfort. And that has just shrunk and shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. And now it is literally the second you connect, you will start getting attacked, right? So
They're just looking for a live element.
it's a
that's
lot
amazing.
of cyber conversations are always kind of scary and sorry about that.
Morose. Okay, so let's
just the
pivot
world we live
to
in.
how damn cool this thing is, and you don't think about it when you use it. So when Noopur and I were talking, she mentioned two things I just had never thought about. Well, let's start with the guide. Okay, how many different elements of technology are behind this guide?
Yeah, it's this is where I said, some people don't understand
Most of them.
the
This is-
scale.
yeah.
But so one of our elements is that guide, right? The viewing guide that people see. But if you think about the sheer complexity behind it, right? It is all of the channels, depending on what you subscribe to, depending on your local. What is your local stations showing at certain times, all the things that you're entitled to. So just our guide runs on, anywhere from 30 to 40,000 virtual machines are spinning at any time, just supporting that, right? And these are, load balanced, geo-distributed, fully resilient, hardened. We go through the entire security lifecycle on every bit of software running on those VMs. So then they have to be really elastic, because think about when people change channels, right? It's usually at the top of half an hour or the top of an hour. So the whole virtualization has really helped us, because we used to have peak capacity sitting around, and now we just scale elastically into the cloud. Now let's talk about all of the things that we've added to that. So we have the voice remote, which goes. So now there's the voice interaction that has to be connected to that. Just recently, we did something that. I'm just so proud of, and literally cried the first time I saw the video of it. We have motion detection, eye motion detection for people with. So voice remote, by the way, first of all, just helps people with disabilities. People who have trouble with. But there are people who are paralyzed, like from the waist down, and they can't move any part of their body except their eyes. And so 2 years ago, we added into that guide the ability to control that with eye movement, right? So you can be fully paralyzed, but you're still. So
That's amazing.
we have the talking guide. We were one of the first ones to do talking guides for. We have the full, how do you raise its, make the font bigger, right? So by the time you add the scale and then all of the additional capabilities, you're talking about a very complex system, again, that could take 30 to 40,000 virtual machines just to get that thing running, right? So the scale.
I'm a huge fan of just the closed caption.
I know.
Half the time, I'm not sure what people are saying. I'm like, what did they say? Yeah, is that right?
My favorite thing to watch are British mystery shows, but I can't understand the accent sometimes. So I always have the closed captioning running, so.
That's great.
Yes.
So next time you pick up your remote, know that you owe 1,000, I don't know, lots of people that are
30 to
keeping it all
yes,
going.
Exactly.
That's amazing. So let's go back to this the cybersecurity. Just give us an idea, like when the Colonial pipeline happened, and the information flow. And I know you realize, how quickly do you guys take a look at that and see if that is going to hit your system, or does it? Does it kind of naturally, by the flow of the network, cause a problem?
It could.
Okay.
But ransomware is a huge issue right now. I mean, there's been like a 200% increase in ransomware, and for those in the audience who may not know, we have cybersecurity is basically has three pillars, right? Those have been the pillars since the profession was born, and they're called confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So confidentiality of your data, integrity of the data, and then availability of your systems, right? And ransomware is one of those few things in cyber that impacts all three. So what's happening today is if you have ransomware and you have critical systems encrypted, it impacts the availability of your service. And we're a critical service provider, and so that's like hugely important to us. The second is confidentiality, because the second thing the bad guys do is they get your data. They offload your data, and it could have sensitive information. So, and then the third is integrity, because sometimes they will give your data back to you, but do you trust that data, right, at that point? So it's really unique almost in all of the type of attacks that you have to deal with. So when something happens, like yesterday, T-Mobile was in the news. They had a data breach. Late last night they acknowledged that the breach happened, and so immediately yesterday, in the morning, I had to step out of some of these wonderful sessions because my team starts looking. We have a threat intel team that starts looking at how did the threat actors get into T-Mobile. And then we immediately start evaluating our own threat surface and go, look, this tactic, they're called TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures, are any of those things that could impact us, right? And again, our surface is enormous, 11 million IPs, 500,000 servers, millions of containers. So you have to start looking at that entire ecosystem, right? And immediately I have to start talking to, our executives because they're all wondering the same thing. Look, what just happened to T-Mobile, could it happen to us, right? So, so when Colonial Pipeline happens, we go into that exact same mode. What can we learn about what happened there? And are we vulnerable to the same attack that happened? And this unfolds over, hours and days and weeks, right? And by the way, my immediate emotional response to, seeing something like T-Mobile in the news is sympathy and empathy, because, you really, in the cyber world, you really kind of know that, it could happen to any of us. So.
Yeah, the bad guys don't seem to sleep, and there's a lot of them.
Yes, there are a lot of them. They're very organized. They share information better than we do. And, ransomware, you talked about ransomware. So one of the latest things, and my guys showed me, and there are guys on our threat intel team. I really focus on having a diverse team, but my guys showed me this. They said, "Hey, come over." And we went on the dark web, and we do this all in an isolated room, and fully, and they actually, the ransomware people, right, who are selling ransomware as a service. So they say, we've created this malware, and hey, we'll sell it to any other person who wants to use this malware to attack somebody. So they actually have ratings from customers. I'm not kidding you. They have customer support. Oh, yeah. They're like 24/7. Mm-hmm. Call us if this thing you bought from us to attack somebody else didn't work. So that's actually what happened at Colonial Pipeline. The people who attacked didn't create the ransomware. They purchased it as a service from somebody else, right? So it's amazing when you see the customer service that they provide to to do the dark deeds that they do.
There's been a lot of really good books written, mostly by people that are cyber, news writers. And it always amazes me. One thing is that the way cybercrime works is really just a digital version of the way criminal operations have worked for a really long time, for forever. And it's just that they can do it in their jammies, on their laptop, and make a ton of money at it. So the books are always fascinating because it just shows how they're really, they game us on the legal and policy side in a way that, I think this group actually would find pretty interesting. And that is that, they don't do it on the United States ground sometimes. A lot of times they've just found if they just go one level removed, they're really hard to catch. And they also bounce off IP numbers. And there's, it's attribution for the longest time was a big problem. And, and people were always like, just punch back. And you're like, but what if you hit the wrong guy? Like you're punching at the guy who's getting, the reflector attack on him. So it's always fascinating to see kind of what it is. But the idea that they actually have customer support and we can't take them down. I mean, that's an international problem. So speaking of that, what about nation state actors? Is that something that you guys tangle with?
Yes, we tangle with everybody. Just, if you just think about, again, the vastness, our network is literally about 1 million miles of network, right? With literally millions of network devices. And and then, we have hundreds of thousands of employees and partners and who, connect to our network. We have devices, every kind of device that you can think of on the network. So we see it all, right? So one of the biggest things that happened last year when schools started, and it was virtual, right, was distributed denial of service attacks by students against their schools' websites. And my team started calling it the fire alarm of 2020.
I don't want to take the test.
You used to go hit the fire alarm and get out of class. And so literally, again.
Did you recruit any of those students? Because they sound like they should be on your hunt team or something.
On my team,
yeah.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. But no, that's not a very high, moral, ethical behavior. That
you can reprogram them. I mean,
that's true. That's true. But
come to the right side.
So so we see attacks like that, and again, because they can go buy DDoS attacks as a service, they don't even have to be super, savvy about it.
And with their parents' credit card, no less.
Exactly. Yeah, right. $10.
Yep.
But so we see everything from that to nation states, and the nation state issue is actually getting worse, and it's we used to be able to kind of divide them up. Russian nation states there were always 4 that we focused on, but the Russians focused more on the political kind of that was their goal. The Chinese was more IP, that was their goal. The Koreans and Iranians were more ransomware and, tried to get, they really getting around some of the sanctions, that's how those regimes actually made. But now it's all mixed up. It's like, everybody has kind of similar type of objectives. The hard part about nation states is they're hard to detect because their goal isn't immediate disruption. Their goal is to lurk, and that's what makes, and that's why they're called advanced persistent threats, because they are very advanced, they are very persistent, and yes, they're threats. So it's a challenge for not just us, everywhere. How do we keep up with that? And it's called, the techniques they used is called living off the land. I know there's an acronym for everything in cyber, but living off the land means that the way that they do the actions mimic what the normal actions on a particular server or network device might be. So it's really, really hard to detect as something different.
So they look native to
they kind of.
It doesn't look that disruptive. That's interesting.
Right. So it's a definite issue. We, like everybody else in the industry, face it.
What was the SolarWinds issue, right? They had been there for a long time.
Been there for a long time.
And then they just had to decide when was the right time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, interesting.
Absolutely. And the company that discovered them was FireEye, a security company, and they got into their networks, and that's how the whole thing came to light. But
I posted something about that, and somebody from FireEye asked me, they're like, "Can you take that down?" I mean, we did actually find it. I'm like, "Yeah, but you were in the middle of it,
I know.
They were kind of testy about that.
I think they did a fantastic job of how open they were. I attended a lot of sessions where Kevin Mandia spoke. the CEO of Fireside.
Yeah, Kevin Mandy is a former Senate staffer.
Oh, I did not know.
Yeah, and that which makes it, there's one of the reasons why Fireside does very well in explaining, this to policymakers, all the challenges, is because he used to, I think, was on Senate Intelligence.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
No, did a really good job of explaining. So yeah.
Yeah, my favorite it used to be, and the Sony attack, because it had so many great elements to it. You had a movie nobody probably would have bothered to go see that pissed off the leader of North Korea. So the president of a Japanese company decides to take it down, and then the president of the United States says out loud that he should have contacted him. And I'm thinking, I'm pretty sure the president of Sony wasn't thinking I should call Barack Obama. So, and then Wire did a whole thing where they followed it. And I mean, the damage that did to Sony, for a year, they said that it just inflicted, they had to go back. Basically, they had to start at ground zero with their whole program.
We always talk about like these seminal events that happen. Sony was one. It changed a lot of the ways that companies do cyber. And I think SolarWinds was one. I think the Biden executive order, explicitly mentions SolarWinds. And so I think it was...
that was a tough
definitely.
one. Okay, we have 1 minute left.
Oh, my gosh.
Anything that you haven't told us yet?
A lot of things. I only see one question. So...
let's see. Do ISPs each have their own approaches to security, or is there a cooperation? That's a good question. Thank you, Anonymous.
Really good question.
Anonymous is really smart.
So I think we do have our own approaches, but we do collaborate. I mean, I know Kim over at Cox, Mary over at Charter. We talk. But we do have our own approaches. So there's cooperation, but at a different level than at the operational level.
So it sounds like it's probably a little more collaborative in the information sharing, but you
Yes,
have you all have your secret sauce.
Yes.
It has been such a pleasure to get to know you, and you are like kind of the magic behind the machine. So I really appreciate you coming out and talking to us about how this all works. So please join me in thanking Noopur for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thanks.